Hello.
And this can also be recorded.
Am I visible clearly? Hello.
Sir, you are not clearly visible.
Okay. Okay.
You are
Just
audible, but you are not clearly visible.
just a second.
Sonali ma'am, shall we start the session?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Now you are visible and audible.
Okay.
So just wait for a few minutes. We will
Yes.
be
Yes.
starting.
Whenever you want to start it, I'm good to go.
Okay. Sonali ma'am, may I start?
Sneha ma'am, Sonali ma'am is just coming in a minute. She said she's just logging in and she'll tell you to start in any moment now.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Sneha. Yes, start the program.
Okay, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. Greetings to one and all present here. I, Sneha Potekar from LLB second year, TMV's Lokmanya Tilak Law College, extend a very warm welcome to our today's guest speaker, Honorable Justice Shri A. Pandey sir. Sir is a joint civil judge, junior division, Panvel, and judicial magistrate of first class. Today's webinar organized by our prestigious institution. Our guest speaker, Honorable Justice Shri A. Pandey sir, will enlighten us on the topic role of internal and external aid in interpretation of statute. Before we go ahead with today's program, I would like to mention certain rules to be followed by all the students throughout this session. It is requested to all the students to keep their videos and mic off during the session so as to avoid the disturbance. And it is also a kind request to please type your questions in the chat box, and we shall be taking the same at the end during question and answer session, so that the program will be conducted in a smoother manner and shall be no interruption. I would now request our principal, Dr. Prakash Deshmukh sir, to kindly begin with today's program by welcoming our guest speaker. Please, sir. Dr. Deshmukh sir, you are not visible or audible.
Sneha?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
sir is visible but not audible.
okay, sir have done, Sneha.
Okay.
Sir, there are going to be
Sneha.
some technical glitches in this. If you don't mind, then we may proceed with the lecture. Like, no need of any
Sneha?
formalities.
Sneha.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
continue.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. We are very lucky to have Honorable Justice Sri A. Pandey, sir, as a guest speaker for today's webinar. Sir is a joint civil judge, junior division Panvel and judicial magistrate of first class. Sir has completed LLB from Ferguson College in 2014. Sir has completed LLM from Pune University in Constitution and Administrative Law in year 2015. Sir has practiced as an advocate in Bombay High Court. I would now request our today's guest speaker to enlighten all of us by commencing with today's session. Please, sir.
Thank you. Sneha, you reminded me of a joke. Someone asked a judicial magistrate how you are. How are you? Sorry. He says first class. Okay. So, respected Principal Dr. Prakash Deshmukh, sir, all the respected faculty members, and young minds of TMV Law College. Very good morning to one and all. I am very delighted to be with you to express my views on role of internal and external aids in interpretation of statutes. But the subject that we have in hand is like a mountain, and the time that we have gotten is not enough to even climb a hillock. So keeping this in mind, I would request everyone to reserve their questions for the end of the lecture. And although this is a theoretical subject, but I would try to include my practical court experiences to help you for your better understanding. So without wasting any more time, let us dive into what we are here today to discuss. And I just wanted to ask you, can I share my screen? Like, is it permitted to?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so topic for our today's discussion is role of internal and external aid in interpretation of statutes. So before we proceed further, I would just like to give you the basic crux of what we are going to see today. I have divided today's lecture into 4 parts. First, we will go into understand what do you mean by interpretation of statutes. At this point, I assume that you all are aware of what statutes are, so I will not go into it. The another thing that we will look into is internal aids, and there are 12 kinds of internal aids which we are going to see separately at appropriate time. And likewise, there are 8 kinds of external aids. So let us go ahead and see what they mean. Okay. So in simple words, interpretation is the process of ascertaining true meaning of the words used in a statute. The object of interpretation of statutes is to determine the intention of the legislature conveyed either expressly or impliedly in the language used. as we popularly know that like for by interpretation we just go into discern what the legislature intended to put in the statute. Okay, so in case you people are wondering who these two gentlemen are, then let me tell you that to the best of my research abilities, they are Samand and Cooley. And being a law student, hate them, love them, but you cannot ignore them. So let us see what they have to say on this topic. So according to Samand, interpretation or construction is a process by which the courts seek to ascertain the meaning of the legislature through the medium of authoritative forms in which it is expressed. And for Cooley, interpretation differs from construction in sense that the former is the art of finding out the true sense of any form of words, that is, the sense that their author intended to convey. Construction, on the other hand, is the drawing of conclusions respecting the subjects that lie beyond the direct expression of the text. So simply put, construction is an additional step to interpretation. And however, in the case of state of Rajasthan versus sugar mills, it was held that they are two sides of the same coin. Like not in this specific words, but I'm giving you the like what it said. Let us now see what our Honorable Supreme Court of India has to say on interpretation. So in case of KP Varghese versus Income Tax Officer, Ernakulam, the Honorable Supreme Court of India observed that interpretation of statute being an exercise in the ascertainment of meaning, everything which is logically relevant should be admissible. So there are rules and aids. So let's see what it says further. A rule is a uniform or established course of things. There are three primary rules of interpretation of statutes: literal, golden, and mischief. An aid, on the other hand, is a device that helps or assists. For the purpose of construction or interpretation, the court has to take recourse to various internal and external aids. Now, taking up our first main topic, there are 12 types of internal aids and they are found in the statute itself. They are shared on the screen. You may have a brief look at them, or I'll just read it out for you. They go like title of the statute, preamble, statement of object and reason, heading and title of chapter, marginal notes, definition clause, interpretation clause, illustrations, explanation, proviso, schedule, exception and saving clause, and punctuation. Now, let us proceed further to see each of them in a bit detail. The first legal aid that the first internal aid that we are going to see is title, and it can be divided into long title and short title. So a long title, like every statute is headed by a long title which describes the object of the act. And when we see the Code of Civil Procedure, then you will see it at the beginning that it starts with an act to consolidate and amend the laws relating to the procedure of the courts of civil judicature. And same as for Dowry Prohibition Act, you will see it like it starts with an act to prohibit the giving and taking of dowry. Okay, so I have also given few case laws on the same topic. The first one being Kerala Education Bill. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court of India held that the policy and purposes may be deduced from the long title and preamble of the statute. So when you want to take assistance of any internal aid, then for long title of the statute, the policy and purposes of that act can be deduced from it. Similarly, in Manohar Lal Singh versus State of Punjab, the Honorable Supreme Court of India held that the act can be relied as a guide to decide the scope of the act. Okay. So now moving to short title. The short title of an act is only for the purpose of reference and identification. It ends with the year of passing of the act. As you can see from section 1 of the Code of Civil Procedure, it reads as, this act may be cited as Code of Civil Procedure 1908. It shall come into force on the first day of January 1909. However, they have their limitations. So the first one being, it has no role to play where the words employed in the language are plain and precise and bear only one meaning. So whenever the words used in the language are clear, we need not go to any rule of interpretation, like this is applicable for everything, for every aid. Then it is only when the language used in the statute is ambiguous and it gives rise to alternate construction, it is only then we take aid of these internal aids. And it cannot prevail over the enactment. It has a very limited scope. It cannot narrow down or restrict the plain meaning of the language of the statute. In Manohar Lal versus State of Punjab, the Honorable Supreme Court held that no doubt the long title of the act indicates the main purpose of the enactment, but it cannot control the express operative provisions of the act. Similarly, in case of Amarinder Kumar Mohapatra versus State of Orissa, the Honorable Supreme Court held that the title of a statute determines the general scope of the legislation. Hello? Hello?
Please mute yourself. All of you, please mute. The session is getting disturbed. Please mute yourself. Please carry on, sir.
Yeah. So in Amarinder Kumar Mohapatra versus State of Orissa, the Honorable Supreme Court of India held that the title of the statute determines the general scope of the legislation, but the true nature of any such enactment has always to be determined not on the basis of the label given to it, but on the basis of its substance. So again, we can see that a very limited role is accredited to title of the statute when we are trying to interpret any statute. Now coming to the next point. Okay. So let us now see what role preamble has to play in interpretation of statutes. So as we all know, the main objective and purpose of the act are found in the preamble of the statute. It is a preparatory statement and it contains the recitals showing the reason for enactment of the act. For example, when you will see the Indian Penal Code, then you will find a preamble at the very beginning, which reads as, whereas it is expedient to provide a general penal code for India, it is enacted as follows. And you will find a similar preamble in the Indian Evidence Act and in many other acts. So in Kashi Prasad versus State, the court held that even though the preamble cannot be used to defeat the enacting clauses of a statute, it can be treated as a key for the interpretation of the statute. Like, it cannot override the statute, but nevertheless, it can be used for interpretation of that statute. Now, let us come to the preamble of our Indian Constitution. The wording of the preamble used in the Indian Constitution highlights some of the fundamental values and guiding principles on which the Constitution of India is based. It serves as a guiding light for the Constitution, and we judges interpret the Constitution in its light. The Honorable Supreme Court of India has time and again ruled that neither it nor any of its contents are legally enforceable. However, it plays a pivotal role when there is an ambiguity in any provision of any article or where the interpretation becomes confusing. Okay. So this is when the spirit of the preamble becomes the guiding factor and leads it to being a stem, root, and source of the Constitution. Now, coming to the case law in Beruberi Union, this was a reference case. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court of India held that the Constitution to the preamble to the Constitution containing the declaration made by the people of India in exercise of their sovereign will, no doubt, is a key to open the minds of framers of the Constitution, which may show the general purposes for which they made the several provisions in the Constitution. But nevertheless, the preamble is not a part of the Constitution. However, in case of Keshwananda Bharti versus State of Kerala, the Honorable Supreme Court took a different view, and it observed that the preamble to the Constitution of India is a part of the Constitution, and it has a significant role in interpretation of the provisions of the Constitution itself and in interpretation of any other statute. And at this point, I would like to suggest you a book where you can see the journey of Keshwananda Bharti. And I think it is Courtroom Genius by Fali Nariman, and it is on Nani Palkiwala. Courtroom Genius by Fali Nariman. So if you read it, you will definitely like it, and it will inspire you and fill you with a feeling of pride of the institution that you are going to be a part of. However, there are some limitations on the use of preamble as an aid for interpretation, and they are like preamble can be resorted to when the language of provision is reasonably capable of alternative construction, like when there are more than one construction available for any statute, more than one interpretation available for any provision, then only you will go back to the preamble and see what it speaks for. And it cannot either restrict or extend the meaning and scope of the words used in the enacting part. It cannot go beyond the main enactment. Like if there is any conflict, then you will have to go with the enactment itself. Like the other point says, if there is any conflict between the preamble and a section, the preamble will have to succumb and section would prevail. And it cannot be regarded as a source of any substantive power or of any prohibition or limitation. It is not a source of any substantive power, or it cannot either prohibit or limit any provision of the Act. In case of A.C. Sharma versus Delhi administration, in this case, the appellant had challenged his conviction under Section 5 of the Prevention of Corruption Act 1947. His main ground was that after the establishment of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, the Anti-Corruption Department of the Delhi Police has ceased to have power of investigating bribery cases because the preamble of that act provided so. However, the court held that no preamble can interfere with clear and unambiguous words of a statute. Now, in this statute itself, there was Section 3, which empowered the Delhi Special Police also to investigate such cases. So there was a conflict between Section 3 of this act and the preamble, and Section 3 was put into effect and not the preamble. So there is another case, which is Rashtriya Mil Mazdoor Sangh versus NTC South Maharashtra. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court, while interpreting certain provisions of the Textile Undertakings Act 1983, held that when the language of the act is clear, preamble cannot be invoked to curtail or restrict the scope of that enactment. Okay. Now, let us come to headings and title of a chapter. So headings, they give the key to the interpretation, and they may be treated as preamble to the provisions following them. So precisely, they are many preambles setting out the main objectives and purposes of the provisions that they lead. So when you see the Indian Penal Code, then you will see that there are several chapters divided into, and the Act has several chapters, and each chapter has a specific heading. Okay, in case of Krishnaiya versus State of AP, it was held that headings prefixed to sections cannot control the plain words of the provision. It is applicable for everything. Like if the language used in a statute is plain and clear, then we need not go to these aids only. Okay, and only in the case of ambiguity or doubt, heading or subheading may be referred to as an aid in construing any provision. Now in Durga Thatera versus Narayan Thatera, it was held that headings are like a preamble which helps as a key to the mind of the legislature, but they do not control the substantive section of the enactment. They are helpful only to ascertain what was in the mind of the framers of that specific statute, but they would not in any way control what is contained in the substantive provision of that statute. In Union of India versus ABN Amro Bank, it was held that the heading of a section can be regarded as key to interpretation of the operative portion of said section. If there is no ambiguity in the language of the provision, or if it is plain and clear, then heading used in said section strengthens that interpretation. If the language is clear, the heading which is used in that chapter, it would strengthen the interpretation. Now, let me cite one example from my own work diary. I had a case of cheating before me under section 420 of the IPC. So the facts of the case were like, a husband had filed this case against her wife, and the facts were like in 2002 they got married. After that, they went to some foreign country, and there the husband, he came to know, or it was diagnosed that the wife was suffering from epilepsy. In common language we call it feet, or in our regional language we call it mirgi. So he started her treatment and everything. And in the year 2012, she filed some case against him, and during that case he came to know that she was suffering from epilepsy before their marriage. So on this ground, he filed a case in the year 2017, saying that at the time, like before their marriage only, she was suffering from epilepsy, and she hid this fact from him. So now, if you look at section 420 of the IPC, then you will find it in chapter 17 of the Indian Penal Code. And the heading of that chapter is of offenses against property. Okay. The heading is of offenses against property. So here the question would arise that whether a human being can be regarded as property. So this is food for your thought. I am not going deep into it. I will not open the merits of that case because I have to still decide it. But whether section 420 of the IPC, which specifically is against, which specifically is for any offenses committed against property. So would section 420 of the IPC be applicable in this case, in facts of this case? So in this case, I think the court may take recourse to the heading of this chapter. Now, coming to the limitations of headings as aid to interpretation, they can neither cut down nor extend the plain meaning and scope of the words used in the enabling part. and they cannot control clear and plain meaning of the words of an enactment. Okay, so now our next topic is marginal notes and side notes. You can see on the right side of your screen, I have annexed an example of marginal notes from our constitution. So you can read it as name and territory of the union, admission or establishment of new states, formation of new states, and alteration of areas, boundaries, or names of existing states. So these are the marginal notes. So they are inserted at the side of the sections, as you can see, and they express the effect of the section stated therein. But unless the marginal notes in the enactment are added by the assent of legislature, they cannot be relied upon. And occasionally they are inaccurate and they are not considered to be part of the statutes. However, the marginal notes in our constitution, they have been added by the Constituent Assembly itself, and hence they are frequently referred and relied upon for interpretation of the provisions. And in Bengal Unity Company versus State of Bihar, the Supreme Court of India held that the marginal notes to Article 286 of the Constitution was part of the Constitution, and therefore it could be relied on the interpretation of that article. And similarly, in SP Gupta versus President of India, the Honorable Supreme Court held that if the relevant provisions in the body of a statute firmly point towards a construction which would conflict with the marginal note has to yield. If there is any ambiguity in the meaning of the provision in the body, the marginal note may be looked into as an aid to construction. So it can be looked into for aiding the interpretation or construction of a statute. However, they also have some limitations, and they are very rarely used for interpretation as they are not considered to be good aid to construction. And only those marginal notes can be used for construing a provision which have been inserted with assent of the legislature. And marginal notes can be called in aid only when the language suffers from some ambiguity and more than one construction is possible. And they cannot frustrate the effect of a clear provision. They also have their limitation. They cannot dictate the provision that they accompany. So our next internal aid is definition or interpretation clause. So the object of definition used in a statute is to avoid the necessity of frequent repetitions in describing the subject matter. So they would mention it at once and then we will have to switch back to it to find out the meaning. A definition contained in the definition clause of a particular statute should be used for the purpose of that act and not any other definition from any other statute. Here I would like to quote an example of a definition of sale given in the Sales of Goods Act and the definition of sale given in the Transfer of Property Act. Both the definitions are different as much as they relate to different kinds of properties. In Sales of Goods Act, the property in question is good, and in Transfer of Property Act we are dealing with immovable property. So the definition of sale given in Transfer of Property Act cannot be used in the to interpret any provision of Sales of Goods Act and vice versa. Okay, so the definition or interpretation clauses are generally included in a statute with the purpose of extending the natural meaning of some words as per the definition given, or to interpret such words, the meanings of which are not clear, by assigning them the meaning even in the definition. So you may also see Section 3 of the Indian Evidence Act, which deals with interpretation clause. Like this is one statute that I came across where I found that it specifically reads as interpretation clause. So in Measures Hamdard Laboratories versus Deputy Labor Commissioner, the Honorable Supreme Court observed that whenever the words means, okay, you can go through this case laws afterwards, you may note it down. They only describe the meaning of means and includes, means and includes, denote and deem. So they have just given the explanation for these terms. Now, even the use of definition has some exception to it, and it is that if the court feels that in the context of a particular provision of the definition clause, if it is applied, it will result in an absurdity. The court will not apply the definition clause while interpreting that provision. Whenever any definition given in the statute itself, if it is brought into effect and it would lead to some absurd interpretation, then that would not be looked into. Illustrations. Now, illustrations, they are sometimes appended to a section of a statute with a view to illustrate the provision of law explained therein. A very large number of Indian acts have illustrations appended to various sections. And now let me pick another example from my work experience. I was serving at Dhule prior to coming to Panvel, and there was a case before me for under the provisions of theft, section 379 of the IPC. So the facts were like a person was carrying a truck laden with sand from Dhule to Chandwad, and when he reached near the ghat, the truck broke down, and the officers from Tehsil, they happened to be there. They inquired him about what was there in the truck. He told them that he was carrying sand, and उसमें उन्होंने फिर उससे रॉयल्टी वगैरह का पूछा. जो भी हम सैंड लेते हैं उसके लिए हमें गवर्नमेंट को रॉयल्टी देनी पड़ती है. Then they asked him for the royalty certificate, and he had that with him. उसने उसको सब दिखा दिया, ये सब हो गया. After that, they told him that your truck is not seem to be properly covered, and there may be chances that you may have spilled some sand on the roadways. So on that ground, he was asked to stay there. उसको उन्होंने बोला कि आप यहीं पे रुकिए, हम जाके खाना खा के आते हैं. वो खाना खाने के लिए गए. In the meanwhile, his truck was repaired. He waited for them, और कुछ टाइम के बाद में वो वहाँ से निकल गया. और उसके अराउंड 2-3 महीने के बाद में उन्होंने एक FIR फाइल की कि हमने उसको रुकने के लिए कहा था, हमने उसके ऊपर एक कार्रवाई की थी, बट इवन इन दैट केस ही फ्लू अवे. सो अब इस यहाँ पे अपने को ऐसा दिख रहा है कि he was the owner of that property. So the question would arise whether a person can commit theft of his own property. So in this case, the illustration given in section 378, I think it is contained in illustration H. You will come to know that a person can be charged for committing theft of his own property. So there are such illustrations given in the act at other places as well, which may come helpful in such cases. So coming to the case laws, in Mahesh Chand Sharma versus Rajkumari Sharma, the Honorable Court observed that illustration is a part of the section and it helps to elucidate the principle of the section. However, illustrations cannot be used to defeat the provision or to modify the language of the section. This is reflected by a legal maxim, exempla illustrant non restringent legum, which means examples only illustrate but do not narrow the scope of rule of law. The other case law that we have in hand is Mutliar Chatterjee versus International Film Co. In this case, it was observed that in construing a section, an illustration cannot be ignored or brushed aside. Similarly, in Muhammad Saidul Arifin versus Yeoi Garg, it was held that the illustrations are of relevance and value in the construction of the text of the section, although they do not form part of the section. Therefore, they should not be readily rejected or as repugnant to the section. So they are relevant for interpretation of provision. However, they do not form part of the section, but they have their relevancy. Now coming to the next topic is proviso. As you can see in some sections of a statute, after the main provision is spelled out, there is a clause added, and it opens with the words provided that. So the part of the section commencing with the words provided that is called proviso. A proviso, it is a clause which is added by a statute to accept something from enacting clause or to limit its applicability. So it is an exception to the general rule, as we all popularly know. So the general rule about the interpretation of a proviso is that proviso is not to be taken absolutely in its strict literal sense, but is of necessity limited to the ambition of the section which it qualifies. Where the proviso is directly repugnant to a section, the proviso shall stand and be held a repeal of the section as the proviso speaks the letter intention of the makers. So what they mean is, whenever a proviso is inserted in any section, it is done so after the main provision is made. So when there is a conflict, the letter intention of the makers of that statute should be looked into. In Vishesh Kumar versus Shanti Prasad, the Honorable Supreme Court held that a proviso cannot be permitted by construction to defeat the basic intent expressed in the substantive provision. However, they cannot be stressed to an extent where they would defeat the intent of the provision. So there is a distinction between the intent of the provision, which has to be read in consonance with other factors as well. So when there is a conflict, you will also have to consider the intention of that specific provision. In Union of India versus Dilip Kumar Singh, it was held that though a proviso does not travel beyond the provision to which it is appended, golden rule is to read the whole section, inclusive of the proviso, in such a manner that they mutually throw light on each other and result in a harmonious construction. Next, we will see explanation. An explanation is added to a section to elaborate upon and explain the meaning of the words appearing in that section. And its purpose is to limit the scope of the main section. Its purpose is not to limit the scope of the main section, but to explain, clarify, subtract, or include something by elaboration. So they undertake to explain what is contained in the main provision. Its purpose is not to limit the main section, but to explain, clarify, subtract, or include something by elaboration. So they are inserted with the purpose of explaining the provision, as we already see. And it does not expand the meaning of the provision to which it is added, but only tries to remove any confusion. A large number of Indian acts have explanations attached to various sections. For instance, section 108 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the word abettor, and it has 5 explanations attached to it. And similarly, section 405 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines criminal breach of trust, it has 2 explanations attached to it. In Bengal Immunity Company versus State of Bihar, the Honorable Supreme Court observed that an explanation is a part of the section to which it is appended, and the whole lot should be read together to know the true meaning of the provision. You have to read it with the main provision to understand its true meaning. In another case, it was held by the Supreme Court that in case of conflict between the main provision and the explanation attached to it, the general duty of the court is to try to harmonize the two. So when there is a confusion between the main provision and the explanation attached to it, the court has to come to an interpretation which would harmonize the effect of both. So I have also listed the object of explanation attached to a statutory provision, and they are to explain the meaning and intendment of the act itself, where there is any obscurity or vagueness in the main enactment, to clarify the same so as to make it consistent with the dominant object which it seems to subserve, to provide additional support to the dominant object of the act in order to make it meaningful and purposeful. And they too have their limitations and explanation. They cannot be used in a way to modify the language of the section itself. And when the wording of the statute is plain, then explanation cannot control it. Now coming to schedules, they are found at the end of a statute, and they contain minute details for working out the provisions of the express enactment. And the expression in the schedule, however, cannot override the provision of the express enactment. Like it is applicable for everything. They cannot override. Like when there is a conflict between the provision itself and any of these aids, the provision itself would prevail. They have a limited role to assist the courts to arrive to some sound interpretation. So the schedules attached to an act generally deals with as to how claims or rights under the act are to be asserted, or as to how powers conferred under the act are to be exercised. Sometimes a schedule may contain some subjects in the form of a list, as is the case with the Constitution of India, to enable the Union and the states to legislate in their respective fields. So you will find schedules in the Indian Constitution. You will find it in the Limitation Act, which is very important for daily code functioning. And you will also find them in Code of Criminal Procedure and many other acts. Sometimes a schedule may contain transitory provisions also to enable an act to remain in existence till the main provision of the act begin to operate. 9th schedule of the Government of India Act. So it was in a nature of a transitory provision where the powers were to be transferred from one government to the other. In measures Afali Pharmaceutical Limited versus State of Maharashtra, the Honorable Supreme Court held that in case of a clash between the schedule and the main body of an act, the main body would prevail and the schedule has to be rejected. Main body over the schedule. Now, coming to exception and saving clause. I have grown up in a time where the laws made by the legislature used to have they used to have words like it shall be applicable to the entire territory of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So now that has become history, but such exception clauses are there in enactment, and we have to respect it. So they are generally added to an enactment with the purpose of exempting something which would otherwise fall within the ambit of the main provision. For instance, the exceptions given in section 499 of the defamation clause, which would not amount to defamation. And similarly, there are some exceptions given under section 300 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines murder. And in case of repugnancy between an operative part and an exception, the operative part must be relied on. Saving clause. So saving clause are generally appended in cases of repeal and enactment of a statute. And by this, the rights already created under repealed enactment are not disturbed, nor new rights are created by it. A saving clause is normally inserted in the repealing statute, and in case of clash between the main part of the statute and saving clause, the saving clause has to be rejected and the main statute would prevail. Punctuation. So it is basically a grammatical thing, and when you will see the old acts, the acts which are made by the Britishers and our forefathers, you will see that they have used punctuations in a very limited sense. But however, in today's date, and especially with municipal laws, especially with municipal laws, I don't know what love they have for punctuations and all, but these acts are very confusing. So as they say that simple is beautiful, so that is the thing. Now, in modern times, the statutes contain punctuation, and therefore, whenever a matter comes before the courts for interpretation, the courts first look at the provision as they are punctuated, and if they feel that there is no ambiguity while interpreting the punctuated provision, they shall so interpret it. However, while interpreting the provision in the punctuated form, if the court feels repugnancy or ambiguity, the court shall read the whole provision without any punctuation. And if the meaning is clear, will so interpret it without attaching any importance whatsoever to the punctuation. If there is any ambiguity with the punctuation, the court would interpret it without, the courts would read it without punctuation. And if that part is found to be sound, then they would read it without punctuation only. And they would not attach any importance to punctuation. In Ashwini Kumar versus Arabinda Bose, in this case, the Honorable Supreme Court held that a punctuation cannot be regarded as a controlling element and cannot be allowed to control the plain meaning of a text. I think we are done with internal aids. Now let us switch to external aids. So when internal aids are not adequate, the court has to take assistance of external aids. So you will switch to external aids only when the internal aid of interpretation are not adequate to help in interpretation of that statute. So it contains 4 aids. They are parliamentary history, historical facts and surrounding circumstances, reports of committees or commissions, social, political, and economic developments and scientific inventions, reference to other statutes, dictionaries, judicial decisions, and other materials. Let us see each of them. So the first one is parliamentary history. So they basically relate to the ingredients of bill in its original form, or the amendments considered during its progress in the legislature, speech of the minister who introduced the bill in parliament, and reports of parliamentary debates, resolution passed by either house of the parliament, the reports submitted by different parliamentary committees. So they are included in parliamentary histories. When we see that any bill is introduced in Lok Sabha, so you will see that some of the minister would introduce it, or any member of parliament who introduces it, he would underline the statement and object of that bill. So that thing can be taken into consideration while interpretation of that statute. So according to traditional English view, the parliamentary history of statute was not considered as an aid to construction. And initially our Supreme Court also excluded parliamentary history, but later it started using it as an aid to interpretation. In Indira Sawhney versus Union of India, while interpreting Article 16(4) of the Constitution, the Supreme Court referred to Dr. Ambedkar's speech in the Constituent Assembly as the expression backward class of citizens is not defined. The court held that reference to parliamentary debate is permissible to ascertain the context, background, and objective of the legislature, but at the same time, such references could not be taken as conclusive or binding on the courts. So thus in the Mandal reservation case, the Supreme Court resorted to parliamentary history as an aid to interpretation. Now coming to the next topic, historical facts and surrounding circumstances. Historical setting cannot be used as an aid if the words are plain and clear, and if the wording are ambiguous, the historical setting may be considered in order to arrive at the proper construction. And historical setting covers parliamentary history, historical facts, statement of objects and reasons, and report of expert committees. And the rule of admissibility of this external aid is especially useful in mischief rule. So mischief rule, as we all know, the Hayden's case. So whenever the court is using historical facts and surrounding circumstances, we can look into these questions that they arrived from the Hayden's case. So we can ask that what was the law before the making of the act? What was the mischief for which the law did not provide? And what was the remedy provided by the act, the one that is enacted recently, and what was the reason of the remedy? So I assume that you all may have heard of mischief rule. So it is a kind of rule of interpretation where when the courts are interpreting any provision, then they would try to suppress the mischief. They would try to arrive at an interpretation that would suppress the mischief. Again, in Bengal Unity versus State of Bihar, it was held that in the construction of Article 286 of the Constitution, the court observed that since the function of the court is to find the meaning of the ambiguous words in a statute, a reference to the historical fact and surrounding circumstances that led to the enactment assist the courts in efficient administration of speedy justice. The rule permits recourse to historical works, engravings, pictures, and documents where it is important to ascertain ancient facts of a public nature. Historical evolution of a provision in the statute is also sometimes a useful guide to its construction. Our next point is reference to other statutes. So statutes must be read as a whole in order to understand the words in their context. Problem arises when a statute is not complete in itself. So whenever the statute is not complete in itself, we will have to go for a pari materia statute. To make you understand what pari materia would mean, in Article 20 of the Indian Constitution, subject to correction, there is a provision for rule against double jeopardy, and the same rule is contained in section 300 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which reads as atrophos acquit and atrophos convict. So these two provisions are pari materia in nature. They provide for the same thing, like they speak on the same thing. So they are pari materia. So the meaning of phrase pari materia was explained in an American case, United Society versus Eagle Bank. It was held that statutes are in pari materia which relate to the same person or thing, or to the same class of person or things. The word par must not be confounded with the word similar. It is used in opposition to, intimating not likeness merely but identity. It is a phrase applicable to public statutes or general laws made at different times and in reference to the same subject. And in State of Punjab versus Okara Grain Buyer Syndicate Limited, the Honorable Supreme Court held that when two pieces of legislation are of different scopes, it cannot be said that they are in pari materia. However, it is not necessary that the entire subject in the statute should be identical. Like Constitution and Civil Procedure Code, they are totally different, and before should be identical before any provision in one may be held to be in pari materia with the some provision in other act. Okay. Now the next topic is reports of committees or commission. So whenever there is any ambiguity in the text of a statute, the court may refer to the various reports of committees or commissions for understanding the exact meaning or intention behind the provision. For example, Justice J.S. Verma committee suggested the Criminal Law Amendment 2013, some other law commission report, Mandal Commission report. So these reports may be referred for understanding the background and intent behind any particular provision when there is any doubt over its interpretation. Judicial decision. Now, it deals with rule of precedent, Article 141 of the Indian Constitution. We all know that the law judgment given by the Honorable Supreme Court of India is binding on all the lower courts, and they are in the form of laws only. They become laws for us. So when judicial pronouncements are being taken as reference, it should be taken into note that the decisions referred are Indian. And if they are foreign, it should be ensured that such foreign country follows the same system of jurisprudence as ours, and that these decisions have been taken in the ground of the same law as ours. So priority has to be given to Indian judgments. And if you're resorting to foreign judgments, then you have to make sure that they follow the same rules of jurisprudence as ours, and the decisions that are given in the same ground as of the same laws as ours. So these foreign decisions have persuasive value. They are not binding only, and are not binding on Indian courts, and where guidance is available from Indian decisions, then reference to foreign decision is of no use. So reference to decisions of the English courts was a common practice in the administration of justice in pre-independent India. The reason behind this was that the modern Indian legal system owes its origin to the English common law system, but after the commencement of Constitution of India, as a result of incorporation of the fundamental rights, the Supreme Court of India started giving more access to American precedents. In General Electric Company versus Renu Sagar Power Company, the Supreme Court of India held that when the guidance is available from Indian decisions, reference to foreign decisions may become unnecessary. Now coming to social, political, economic development and scientific inventions. Statute must be interpreted to include circumstances or situations which were unknown or did not exist at the time of enactment of the statute. Any relevant changes in the social condition and technology should be given due weightage. Courts should take into account all these developments while construing statutory provisions. Statutes, the laws made in the past are applied in the present contemporary society in the light of changed social, political, and legal economic circumstances, taking into consideration the advancement in science and technology. And the statutes, they must be interpreted in accordance with the spirit of the Constitution of India, even though the statutes were passed before independence of India or before the commencement of India. Article 13(2), if I'm not wrong, that all post-constitutional law, they have to be they should not be ultra vires to the provisions of Constitution. So this is what it states for. Now, in case of State versus J.S. Chaudhary, it relates to section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act 1872, which only mentions about handwriting experts and not typewriting experts, for the reason that typewriters were not invented at the time when this act was brought into force. And in the instant case, the state wanted to use the opinion of a typewriting expert as evidence in a murder case. So the Supreme Court then overruled its own decision in the case of Hanumant versus State of Madhya Pradesh, which held that opinion of the typewriting expert was inadmissible as evidence in the court of law. So the change in technology was appreciated, and the Honorable Supreme Court took a view that the opinion of typewriting expert would also be covered under section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act, which speaks for writing expert. So on the question of meaning of the word handwriting in section 45 to include typewriting, the word science occurring independently and in addition to the word handwriting in section 45 is sufficient to indicate that the opinion of a person specially skilled in the use of typewriters and having the scientific knowledge of typewriters would be an expert in this science. And his opinion about the identity of typewriting for the purpose of identifying the particular typewriter on which the writing is typed is a relevant fact under section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act. Dictionaries. So when a word is not defined in the statute itself, it is permissible to refer to dictionaries to find out the general sense in which that word is to be understood in common parlance. And however, in selection of those meanings, the one like regard had to be always had to the scheme, context, and legislative history. It should be uh, those words which are in tune with the provisions of that statute should be considered. Other materials, the courts also refer to various international regional instruments like agreements, treaties, conventions, etc. These external aids are very useful tools not only for the proper and correct interpretation or construction of statutory provision, but also for understanding the object of the statute, the mischief sought to be remedied by it, circumstances in which it was enacted, and many other relevant matters. So, in the absence of the admissibility of these external aids, sometimes court may not be in a position to do justice in a case. Okay. So, what we have seen that if the meaning of the statute, of the words used in a statute are not clear, they are ambiguous, then the courts would require to resort to the internal and external aids. And firstly, the court would look for the internal aids for interpretation of statute. And in case when they are not enough, then only the court would switch to external aids. So with this, I conclude my lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You gave us immense knowledge throughout this session. And I'm sure that now every student among us will study this topic with more interest.
Yeah.
Now, with your permission, we would now begin with question and answer session. Shall
Yes.
we?
Yes, yes.
Now, I would kindly request all the participants to start asking the questions. You can unmute yourself one by one. Please start.
Good morning, sir. This is Mahavir Arya. I have
Yeah.
a small query. As you had said that in case the meaning of a word is ambiguous, we would refer to dictionaries. My question is, in case the patent meaning of a word is one thing in the dictionary, however, in case of special organizations which have their own rules or regulations to run by, they have defined that particular word in another sense. If the matter goes in front of the court, what will the court hold?
The one which is relevant in the facts and circumstances of that case.
No, sir, I'll just give an example in the sense that supposing a certain word, which as per maybe the dictionary or even by Black's Law Dictionary, says one thing. I'll come to the word of moral turpitude.
Okay.
Moral turpitude in the normal sense would mean something that is so shockingly base that will shake the morality of society at large. However, there are certain organizations which have defined offenses of moral turpitude in a different manner. Now, if there's an offense,
certain organizations,
certain services, I'll put it that way, certain services,
okay,
which have defined offenses classified as offenses of moral turpitude, which are not shocking to the society at large, but within the organization, it is not accepted. So if this matter goes in front of a court, will the court hold the organization because the organization has defined it as such?
If they have their own set of rules to work that organization out, then we will have to look into it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Any more question? Please unmute yourself and ask the question. Sneha, please read out the question for sir.
Next question from Kishore Vaidhi sir. What is meant by absurdity? Is it considered as external aid?
It is not an aid. Absurdity is like कि एक प्रोविजन को हम स्टैट्यूट के हिसाब से इंटरप्रेट करने दे रहे हैं और वो एकदम ही एब्सर्ड है आज के टाइम के हिसाब से. लाइक अडल्ट्री फॉर एग्जांपल. अडल्ट्री जिस टाइम पे लॉज बने थे उस टाइम का सब सर्कमस्टेंसेस अलग था. बट इन टुडेज टाइम whether can we expect the when a husband control his wife? तो आज के हिसाब से अडल्ट्री जो प्रोविजन था that was completely absurd. It is not a rule of interpretation, but it is a situation where the law, if it is given effect into its strict sense, then it would lead to something which is not accepted in today's society.
Any more question? Please unmute and ask the questions.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning.
Sir, this is Shailendra Agarkar. Sir, I just wanted, can you explain the meaning of provisos in internal aid?
You want me to explain it again?
Yeah, a little bit, sir. I was actually, the connection was not proper, so I missed out
So
on
I'll
some
do
part.
one thing, like I am running short on time. I will
Okay.
provide you the PPT, you may read it.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you very much.
So it is generally an exception to general rule. Whenever a law is made, it provides for a proviso clause, and by providing it, it chalks out certain exceptions that are not applicable to the main provision. In short, it is this.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Please ask the question fast so that sir is falling short of the time. Please do it fast.
Good morning, sir. My name is Rakesh Tripathi. One general question.
Yeah.
Typically, what percentage of the judgments depend on interpretation, which means that, the law is not very, very clear. There is ambiguity.
I cannot hear you. Sorry.
The interpretation, whether internal or external aid, needs to be resorted to.
I did not get you.
I'm saying out of 100 judgments, let's say Judge J, interpretation becomes an integral part of the judgment process, and what percentage of the case?
Like they have good weightage. Like for instance, if you see Section 6 of Hindu Succession Act, you will see that there has been a transition in that the co-parental rights of a girl child. So the most recent one has to be looked into.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
So my name is Aarti Agrawal. I have a question.
Hi.
Sir, while interpreting a statute, what priority is given, like internal aid, external aid, or the equity, good conscience, and the English provisions of law?
First and foremost, if the wording in the statute is clear, then you don't have to go to the external or internal aid. And between internal and external aid, firstly, you will have to pick up aids from the internal one, and then afterwards, only when they do not provide any sound interpretation, then you will switch to external aid.
So then, if in the absence of both, then when does the rule of equity, good conscience come into picture?
Like same example as adultery, like it has to come in picture at some point of time, and it is covered under social, economic, and political changes.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Equity would get covered under social changes, no? So it is already covered into external aid of interpretation.
Thank you, sir.
Any more question, please? Taking that there is no more questions, Sneha, please continue.
Thank you so much, sir. Today's session have not only enlightened our knowledge, but also gave us practical approach towards the interpretation of statute. And it was honor for all of us to hear from you, sir. Now, I would now request Assistant Professor Sonali Sharma, Madam, to kindly end up today's session by delivering a vote of thanks. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you, Sneha. A very good morning to all the dignitaries, faculty members, and my dear students across the campus for today's session. I, Assistant Professor Sonali Sharma, on my behalf and on behalf of TMV's Lokmanya Tilak Law College, extend a cordial and a sincere vote of thanks to our today's speaker, Shri Honorable A. Pandey sir, for gracing today's events by sparing valuable time and knowledge to us. We trust that today's session and experience shared by sir could not only enlighten but also add to the enthusiasm and interest in the students for the academics of towards the iOS, that is the interpretation of statutes. Sir, I agree that as you started with the thing that the iOS, that is the interpretation, is the mountain which could not be achieved in a short session. But I really agree to that by presenting your session today with the core subject. You have really achieved the mountain, and even our students have got that achievement.
I was
Sir,
very doubtful
continuing
about
with
it.
my vote of thanks.
Yes,
No,
yes,
sir, it was really very interesting, sir. Continuing with my vote of thanks, I extend my gratitude and warm thanks to Honorable Chancellor Dr. Deepak Tilak, sir, Honorable Dr. Praniti Tilak, madam, our campus director, and Honorable Mahesh Logaonkar, sir, campus in charge, for constant support and approval for organizing the academic sessions. Taking forward, I would propose a heartiest thanks to respected principal and head of department, Dr. K. Shri Ramachandra Murthy sir, Pune Law Department, for constantly promoting and approving the intellectual upliftment of students through the various sessions like today. And I propose a very warm thanks to our respected principal, Dr. Prakash Deshmukh sir, Kharghar Law Department, without whose endeavors the event today was impossible. A heartiest thanks to Assistant Professor Varsha Badwe, Madam, Coordinator Law Department, Kharghar Campus, who always guided and supported us for the academic activities. Further, I propose a heartfelt thanks to all faculty members across the campus for their constant coordination and support for the session like today. I appreciate and extend a heartiest vote of thanks to our host, Sneha Potekar, that is LLB second year student, for her hosting, a successful hosting for today. The special vote of thanks to all dear students for attending and patient listening for our session. With this, I declare the session has over. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir.